hands calloused like stone, breath crystallizing into diamonds, and the Khan's gaze as sharp as a Mongol arrow. Have you ever wondered what life was truly like in a distant, powerful empire like Mongolia, where harshness intertwined with the extraordinary? In the moments to come, we'll journey together through a deeply emotional narrative where you'll feel profoundly the resilience amidst endless cold as nature itself becomes a formidable test. Let your mind drift with the faint, distant howl of hungry wolves on the winter steppe, or listen to the mysterious silence of a city after historical upheavals. This is a story of raw survival instincts, of the fragile boundaries of humanity, and of a truth etched through time. As you settle into your own peaceful space, gently turn off the lights, pull your warm blanket close, and let your spirit float along with the flow of the story. Wherever you are in the world, please share with us by leaving a small comment. We wish you a peaceful sleep and beautiful dreams.
You jolted awake, not to the polite chime of an alarm, but to the bone-deep cold that clawed at your skin and the snort of a horse right beside your ear. The haunting smell of damp yak wool, horse sweat, and earth filled your nostrils, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to wrap around your very soul. Your skin felt numb, your limbs stiff as planks of wood. Frost, like 1,000 tiny needles, clung to your hair and eyebrows, freezing every exposed patch of flesh. As your eyes slowly adjusted, you saw your own breath crystallize into wisps of white smoke in the dim pre-dawn air, ghostly tendrils against the growing gray. The colossal silhouette of your horse, a living fortress, stood guard against the biting wind, its heavy breathing echoing like a blacksmith's hammer in the terrifying silence of the steppe. You tried to pull the damp, sour-smelling woolen blanket tighter, but the only real warmth came from the horse's massive body, your unwilling companion, your furnace, your transportation, and sometimes your last desperate meal. This animal didn't apologize for stepping on your tunic. In this world, apology was a weakness you couldn't afford. When you attempted to sit up, a sharp pang in your shoulder reminded you of the night's trials. You remembered the ghastly howl of wolves that had sliced through the darkness, a primeval symphony of hunger. People say that rumors whisper of the steppe's mysterious creatures, of the wandering spirits of those who fell. They always lurk in the dense gloom. Only the ancient walls of distant ruins truly know the secrets hidden within this unforgiving land. You'd heard tales of people simply vanishing, swallowed whole by the vastness. A shiver, colder than the frost, ran down your spine, not from the temperature, but from the instinctive dread that gnawed at you, a persistent rat in the back of your mind. Your hand instinctively reached for the cold steel of the dagger tucked beneath your makeshift pillow, a reflex etched deep into your very being, a testament to the constant threat that was your new normal. The sun hadn't even bothered to peek over the horizon, yet you could already hear the restless stirrings of the camp. Without a word, figures mounted their horses like silent ghosts, dissolving into the morning mist. A boy, no older than 10, his bow longer than he was tall, galloped past you, yawning widely. His saddle, by the looks of it, had seen more sunrises than your entire lifespan. This small detail assaulted your sense of your own naivete, a stinging reminder of your foreignness. Fumbling, you tightened your sash, gathered your meager belongings, and hoisted yourself onto the horse's back. There was no ceremony here, no breakfast spread. You shoved a piece of dried, stringy meat, tough as shoe leather, into your mouth, biting down hard. Your jaw ached with the effort, but you knew if you wanted to survive, it would have to be stronger than steel by tomorrow. This wasn't the life you knew. This was the shocking reality of Mongolia, a brutal awakening to a world that cared nothing for your comfort or your past. Every breath was a gamble, every moment a test. You felt like a lone dandelion in a hurricane, desperately clinging to life. This story, you realized, was already carved into your bones. The camp dissolved with the same eerie silence it possessed in its waking hours. No orders were shouted, no farewells exchanged. Each warrior, each woman, each child knew their place in this fluid, living organism that was the Mongol horde. You were just another cog, expected to perform. The wind, a relentless sculptor, carved lines into your face, chapping your lips until they felt like raw, exposed nerves. It wasn't just a breeze, it was a biting, personal assault, a constant reminder of the steppe's unyielding will. Your fingers, still clumsy from the cold, fumbled with the reins, the leather stiff and unyielding in your grasp. The ground beneath your horse's hooves was a blur of frozen earth and scattered tufts of grass, a landscape that seemed to stretch into eternity, indifferent to your struggles. You quickly learned the silent language of the march, the subtle shifts in the horse's gaits, the way the sun, a reluctant orb, slowly climbed the sky, casting long distorted shadows that danced like specters across the vast plains. There was no pause for personal needs. You learned to relieve yourself from the saddle, a clumsy, undignified affair that quickly became second nature. Eating was a similar exercise in efficiency, the same tough, sinewy meat from your morning's challenge, torn with teeth that were slowly grinding down into oblivion, or a piece of hardened curd, tasting faintly of dust and desperation. This wasn't dining, it was fueling a machine, your body, pushing it beyond limits you ever thought possible. The silence of the group was profound. No idle chatter, no songs, only the rhythmic thud of hooves, the creak of leather, and the whistle of the wind, a constant companion that mocked your every weakness. You noticed a warrior, a grizzled man named Hulan, riding beside you for a time. His eyes, like chips of flint, never strayed from the horizon, always scanning, always alert. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke volumes about his years in this brutal university of survival. He never offered a word, and you learned not to expect one. The sheer relentless pace was a form of torture. Every muscle in your legs and back screamed in protest, a symphony of aches that pulsed with each jarring step of the horse. You changed horses frequently, not because you were tired, but because your mount was exhausted. You had to be tougher than the animal you rode, for if your horse faltered, you carried the burden. This was the balance here, a harsh, undeniable truth. If a horse stumbled or showed signs of extreme fatigue, it might be left behind, or worse, become the next meal. You felt the chill of that reality deep in your bones. The wind, a hungry beast, seemed to howl a challenge with every gust, testing your resolve. Each passing hour felt like a mini-eternity, a slow-motion battle against the elements and your own fading endurance.
The landscape itself was an enemy. Featureless, vast, it offered no shelter, no hiding places. The sky, a pale, indifferent canvas, seemed to mock your tiny existence. You learned to read the subtle signs of the steppe, the direction of the wind, the texture of the snow, the way the grass bent, each whisper a potential warning. This nomadic existence meant constant vigilance, a state of heightened awareness that gnawed at your nerves like a slow-acting poison. You saw a young woman, perhaps barely older than you, carrying an infant strapped to her back, her face set in a grim mask of determination, riding just as relentlessly as the warriors. There was no leniency for youth or motherhood here. Everyone was a piece in the grand, unyielding machinery of the horde. You heard the stories, passed in hushed tones around sparse fires, usually from the older warriors, their voices raspy as dry leaves in the wind. If you fell, you would be trampled by your own comrades' horses, a mere obstacle in their relentless advance. If you stopped moving, even for a moment of weakness, you would be left behind, a forgotten footnote in the grand march. If you dared to complain, no one would listen. They would simply assume the wolves had found you sooner than expected. People say that rumors whisper of the ghosts of those left behind, forever condemned to wander the vast, empty plains, eternally searching for a place to rest, a peace that never comes. The thought was a cold comfort, chilling you more than the actual temperature. The concept of walking was an insult, a punishment reserved for captives or the truly disgraced. You realized with a startling clarity that in the Mongol Empire, your life was literally tied to your horse. You weren't a prisoner, at least not yet, but your freedom was an illusion, tethered to the unwavering strength and endurance of your mount. This was the shocking reality of their mobility, a ruthless efficiency that allowed them to vanish into the horizon as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind nothing but trampled earth and the echo of unspoken fears. Every sunrise was a lottery, every sunset a miracle. You were no longer just a person, you were a unit of survival, a primitive machine fueled by instinct and the grim necessity of a life that demanded everything and gave nothing back but the stark, unvarnished truth of existence. This journey had only just begun, and the next stretch of this story promised even deeper dives into the unflinching heart of the steppe.
The piercing shriek ripped through the dawn, a raw, guttural sound that froze your very blood even before your eyes snapped open. It wasn't the distant howl of a wolf this time, but something far closer, far more immediate. Your horse, a creature of immense power, bucked violently beneath you, its terrified whinny a trumpet blast of pure, unadulterated fear. You tasted dirt, sharp and metallic, as you clung desperately to its mane, your knuckles white as bleached bone. Panic, a cold, grasping hand squeezed your chest. You didn't need to see to know. Something was terribly wrong. The camp, usually a tableau of silent, efficient awakening, was now a scene of chaotic, panicked motion. Horses whinnied, men shouted terse, guttural commands, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with a sudden, palpable dread. Your heart hammered against your ribs like a trapped bird, threatening to burst free. This wasn't the slow, creeping cold of the steppe. This was the sudden, brutal awakening to absolute terror, a visceral confirmation that danger in this world wasn't a distant threat, but a constant, hungry shadow at your heels. The very earth seemed to tremble beneath the rising panic, a drumbeat of doom echoing in your ears. You swung your head wildly, trying to pinpoint the source of the shriek. It had come from the direction of the supply wagons, nestled on the edge of the sprawling camp. Your training, a relentless drill that had begun to rewrite your very instincts, screamed at you to locate your weapon. Your hand automatically went to the familiar cold hilt of your dagger at your hip, its weight a meager comfort against the overwhelming sensation of vulnerability. Around you, warriors, usually so stoic, moved with a new urgency, their faces tight masks of grim resolve. They weren't merely riding, they were converging, like a pack of wolves sensing a kill, towards the commotion. The sheer speed with which they reacted, without a single shouted order, spoke volumes about the brutal efficiency of this horde. This wasn't a world of contemplation or hesitation. It was a world where instinct was king, and a moment's delay meant a swift, unforgiving end. You felt like a small lost boat caught in the swirling currents of a raging river, desperately trying to steer. The wind, not merely a decorative breeze, sliced across your face like 1,000 invisible blades. It seemed to have sharpened its edge overnight, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of fear and the earthy scent of disturbed ground. You pushed your horse forward, forcing it into the flow of other riders. The cold that had greeted you at dawn now seemed trivial, overshadowed by the icy grip of adrenaline that coursed through your veins. Your face, usually numb from the constant exposure, felt raw, exposed, as if the wind itself sought to flay the skin from your bones. You could feel the subtle movements of your horse beneath you, its muscles taut and quivering, responding to the collective tension of the herd. You glanced at the warrior beside you, a grim-faced man with eyes like chips of flint. He merely stared straight ahead, his posture rigid, his hands tight knots of leather and sinew on the reins. There was no exchange of words, no comforting glance. In this world, solidarity was a silent understanding born from shared, brutal experience. You quickly learned the deeper, unspoken language of the march, the almost imperceptible shifts in the horse's gaits, the way the sun, a reluctant orb, slowly climbed the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters across the vast plains. Every hoofbeat was a measure of progress, every creak of leather a note in the harsh symphony of survival. You had already swapped horses twice this day, a seamless transition born of desperate repetition and practiced efficiency. It wasn't because you were tired, it was because your mount was exhausted, its flanks heaving, its breath coming in ragged gasps. This was the unspoken rule. You had to be tougher than the animal beneath you. For if your horse faltered, if it showed signs of weakness, you bore the additional weight, the burden of its failing strength. This was the balance here, a harsh, undeniable reality that scoffed at any notion of empathy or weakness. The biting cold, a relentless predator, seemed to crawl into every sinew, burrowing deep through your thick wool tunic, leaving you feeling hollow from within, a vacant space where warmth used to reside, replaced by a bone-deep chill that penetrated your very core. There was no pause for personal needs. You learned to relieve yourself from the saddle, a clumsy, undignified affair that quickly became second nature, a small indignity swallowed by the larger demands of the journey. Eating was a similar exercise in ruthless efficiency. The same tough, sinewy meat from your morning's challenge, torn with teeth that were slowly grinding down into oblivion, or a piece of hardened curd, tasting faintly of dust and desperation. This wasn't dining, it was fueling a machine, your body, pushing it beyond limits you ever thought possible, a relentless furnace burning through its very foundations. The silence of the group was profound, a weighty blanket that seemed to press down on all communication. No idle chatter, no songs, only the rhythmic thud of hooves, the creak of leather, and the whistle of the wind, a constant companion that mocked your every weakness and amplified the desolation. You noticed the grizzled warrior Hulan riding beside you for a time. His eyes, like chips of flint, never strayed from the horizon, always scanning, always alert, a sentinel of survival. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke volumes about his years in this brutal university of survival, every gesture honed by necessity. He never offered a word of comfort or instruction, and you learned not to expect one. His mere presence was a tacit acknowledgment of your shared fate. The sheer, relentless pace was a form of torture or persistent rack on which your body was stretched. Every muscle in your legs and back screamed in protest, a symphony of aches that pulsed with each jarring step of the horse, a constant drumbeat of pain. You changed horses frequently, a fluid, practiced motion that bespoke long hours of necessity. This continuous motion was more than just travel, it was a philosophy, a way of life that forged unbreakable bonds of resilience. You felt the chill of that reality deep in your bones. A horse's falter could mean your ruin. The wind, a hungry beast, seemed to howl a challenge with each gust, testing your resolve and stripping away any lingering illusions of comfort. Each passing hour felt like a mini-eternity, a slow-motion battle against the elements and your own fading endurance, a relentless current that pulled you forward, whether you willed it or not.
The landscape itself was an enemy, vast and indifferent,
offering no shelter, no comfortable hiding places. The sky, a pale, indifferent canvas, seemed to mock your tiny existence, a grand, mocking dome above your struggle. You learned to read the subtle signs of the steppe, the direction of the wind, the texture of the snow, the way the grass bent, each whisper a potential warning of unseen dangers. This nomadic existence meant constant vigilance, a state of heightened awareness that gnawed at your nerves like a slow-acting poison, a corrosive acid eating away at your inner peace. You saw a young woman, perhaps barely older than you, carrying an infant strapped to her back, her face set in a grim mask of determination, riding just as relentlessly as the seasoned warriors. There was no leniency for youth or motherhood here. Everyone was a piece in the grand, unyielding machinery of the horde, a cog in a vast, merciless engine. You heard the stories, passed in hushed tones around sparse, flickering fires, usually from the older warriors, their voices raspy as dry leaves in the wind, carrying the wisdom of countless trials. If you stumbled and fell, you would be trampled under the hooves of your own vast, unseeing herd, a mere obstacle in their relentless advance, a brief, unfortunate bump in the road. If you dared to stop moving, even for a moment's weakness, you would simply be left behind, deemed nothing more than a discarded burden, a sacrifice to the vastness, your life extinguished like a forgotten ember. If you even thought to complain, no one would bother to listen. They would simply assume the wolves had found you sooner than expected, a grim, unspoken verdict that sealed your fate. People say that rumors whisper of the ghosts of those left behind, forever condemned to drift across the endless steppe, spectral figures eternally searching for a place to finally rest, a peace that will forever elude them, their endless sorrow mingling with the wind. The thought was a cold comfort, chilling you far more profoundly than the actual temperature, a deep-seated dread that rooted itself in your soul. The concept of walking was an insult, a punishment reserved for captives or the truly disgraced, a mark of utter humiliation. You realized with a startling clarity that in the Mongol Empire, your life was literally tied to your horse, a single unbreakable thread connecting you to survival. You weren't a prisoner, at least not yet, but your freedom was an illusion, tethered to the unwavering strength and endurance of your mount, a fragile tether constantly threatened by the unseen dangers of the open land. This was the shocking reality of their mobility, a ruthless efficiency that allowed them to vanish into the horizon as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind nothing but trampled earth and the echo of unspoken fears. Every sunrise was a lottery, every sunset a miracle, a testament to sheer brute perseverance. You were no longer just a person, you were a unit of survival. A primitive machine fueled by instinct and the grim necessity of a life that demanded everything and gave nothing back but the stark, unvarnished truth of existence. This journey had only just begun, and the next stretch of this story promised even deeper dives into the unflinching heart of this shocking reality. One time your horse reared back abruptly, its terrified whinny tearing from its throat like a shredded banner. It was not the wind, nor another rider. It was a direct, visceral reaction to something unseen by you, something truly horrifying. Your eyes instinctively scanned the path ahead, catching a strange, dark streak on the ground, a grotesque disruption in the otherwise monotonous landscape. It was the mangled carcass of another horse, torn apart and gnawed clean, nothing left but a hollow, splintered skeleton, a chilling monument to violence. This was the unmistakable sign of a predatory attack, or perhaps a vicious, bloody clash that had occurred mere moments before your arrival. The sickening stench of fresh blood and exposed entrails slammed into your nostrils, a wave of nauseating horror that threatened to make you retch, a foul perfume of death clinging to the air. It was a stark, brutal reminder that death didn't just arrive on the point of an arrow or the edge of a sword. It could emerge from anywhere, at any moment, in this world where nature itself was a relentless predator, an entity that offered no quarter and demanded constant, unwavering vigilance. Your throat felt parched and raw, a dryness that had nothing to do with thirst, but everything to do with the visceral fear clinging to your insides, a burning knot that tightened with every beat of your heart. You looked around at your comrades, their faces impassive as stone, already moving on, unfazed. Their acceptance of this brutal reality was the most chilling thing of all, a silent testament to lives forged in the crucible of survival, a shared understanding etched in the lines of their weathered faces. This was the rhythm of the Mongol Empire, a continuous, arduous trek across a land that never yielded, a test of spirit and body that few could endure. Every day was a cycle of waking to cold, riding till exhaustion, enduring hunger and thirst, and sleeping with one eye open. The dust, a fine, gritty powder, coated everything, clinging to your skin, invading your lungs with every breath, and etching itself into your very soul. You were slowly becoming a part of the landscape, a creature of the steppe, stripped of the comforts and conventions of your previous life. The vastness of the sky above, an endless blue dome, sometimes felt like a benevolent guardian, sometimes an indifferent observer, but always a reminder of your minuscule place in this grand, unfolding drama of survival. You no longer thought of home in the way you once did. Home was here now, on the back of a horse, surrounded by grim, silent warriors, under an unforgiving sun or a star-dusted sky that offered no promises. And as the day drew to a close and the light began to fade, you knew the next stretch of this story, the next journey, would only push you further into the unflinching heart of this shopping reality.
The acidic gnawing in your stomach had become a relentless companion. 100 tiny knives twisting in your gut. A dull, pervasive ache that was never pleasant, only tolerable. You stumbled, your legs feeling like leaden posts, and collapsed onto your knees near a small, sputtering fire. The acrid scent of burning dung, a bitter, familiar comfort in the frigid air. Your vision swam for a moment, the world tilting precariously, a dizzying symptom of days spent with little sustenance beyond what your horse provided and the occasional mouthful of melted snow. This wasn't just hunger. This was a deep, primal craving that had begun to rewrite the very blueprint of your being, a relentless beast demanding its due, a starving wolf not just tearing at your intestines, but gnawing at your very soul. It stripped away all pretense, all civility, leaving only the bare, vibrating wire of survival. Your body, a symphony of protest, screamed for warmth, for energy, for anything to quell the relentless emptiness that echoed within your very core. Every shallow breath felt like a sharp pang, a rediscovery of the persistent, gnawing fear of starvation, a silent alarm that never truly shut off. Your heart hammered against your ribs like a frantic drum, each beat a desperate plea for fuel, for life. Your guts clenched and writhed with such intensity you felt a wave of nausea threaten to overwhelm you, a violent uprising from deep within your starved body. Could you ever truly eat your fill again? Had you forgotten what it felt like to be truly satiated, to feel that gentle warmth spread through you after a meal? The memory of it was a distant, fading dream, almost as foreign as the concept of a soft bed. Your hands, trembling uncontrollably, were a clear signal not just of physical exhaustion, but also the crushing mental strain you were under. A thin sheen of cold sweat clung to your skin beneath the heavy layers of felt and leather, a ghostly shroud of anxiety that clung to you more persistently than the dust of the steppe. A tall Mongol man, his face a landscape of sun-scorched lines and deep-set eyes, approached you. This was Hulan, a warrior whose very presence seemed to carve silence from the air, a man whose every movement spoke of purpose and grim survival. He held out a leather pouch that rustled softly, the sound a deceptive whisper of promise that barely masked a more unsettling reality, and a piece of dried meat. His gaze was as unforgiving as a winter gale, devoid of warmth or judgment, yet penetrating enough to strip you bare, revealing every flicker of apprehension. The soft rustle of the pouch as you took it was almost deceptive. The liquid inside sloshed with a thick, viscous quality, a rog, fermented mare's milk. The moment it reached your nose, a pungent, sour stench assaulted you, a nauseating wave that seemed to climb right into your brain, taking hold with unwelcome tenacity. It was more haunting than the smell of an old saddle, more aggressive than the damp, stale air of a neglected barn. It conjured vivid images of a muddy, bacterial horse stable, brimming with unseen life, a putrid vision that made your throat constrict. And you knew instantly, this wasn't merely a meal. It was a gauntlet thrown, a daring challenge to your very will, a cruel test of your resolve. Your stomach lurched in protest, a desperate internal battle against the inevitable. Could you really drink this? Your mind screamed in disgust, a voice from a forgotten life. Was this truly the price of survival? The conflict raged within you, the fierce biological imperative to consume, to live, against the shame and revulsion triggered by the foul-smelling liquid. You brought the leather pouch to your lips, hesitating for only a fraction of a second, a brief, foolish hesitation against the tide of necessity. The first sip hit your tongue like a shockwave. It was rancidly sour, with a faint, unsettling fizz that made your stomach clench and writhe in protest. As it slid down your throat, it burned like molten lead, leaving behind a trail of fiery discomfort that felt like 1,000 microscopic bacteria were dancing a furious jig inside your body, a violent, unseen ballet of digestion. Yet around you, even children, their faces weathered beyond their years, drank this same potent concoction without a single blink. Their eyes as stoic and unblinking as seasoned warriors, a chilling testament to their upbringing. They were machines, and you were still human. Then came the meat. You bit into the piece of dried mutton. It was hard as a stone, tough as old rope, and possessed the dull, lifeless gray color of death itself, a grim talent of survival. Your teeth, already aching from countless battles with similar fare, ground down with excruciating effort. Minutes crawled by, each chew a monumental task, but the meat seemed to defy reduction, only becoming wet and stringy, refusing to yield its substance. Your jaw throbbed with dull pain, a constant reminder of the physical toll this existence exacted. Your teeth, you wondered, did they still have a purpose beyond mere survival? Had they also, like your spirit, begun to grind into oblivion? People say that secrets buried deep beneath the sands of time reveal the ancient Mongol ways of turning the seemingly useless into sustenance, and only those with the iron will of the steppe could truly stomach it, a hidden knowledge passed down through generations, a cruel wisdom that made the impossible palatable.
A sudden, sharp image flashed behind your eyes, a vivid, tormenting mirage in the desolate landscape of your hunger. You were back in a warm, dimly lit room, the scent of steaming rice and hearty bone broth filling the air, mingling with the laughter of your family. Your mother's face, soft and kind, smiled as she placed a bowl before you, the food of vibrant tapestry of color and aroma. The warmth of the fire, the easy conversation, the simple act of being full. It was a painful whisper from a lifelong past, a cruel taunt that made the current reality of the rancid arag and the stone-hard meat even more excruciatingly vivid. The phantom smell of home-cooked food, ripping open the emotional fragility you desperately tried to bury, a stark contrast that underscored the depth of your internal suffering. You lipped around the stubborn meat, the silence of your surroundings pressing in. Silence. Only the sound of blood rushing in your ears and the relentless wind outside. You glanced around at the other warriors, their faces sculpted by hardship, their movements precise and economical. No one spoke. No one seemed to savor their meal. They ate like efficient machines, quickly, silently, their focus entirely on the task at hand, always ready to move, always poised for the next command. They were machines, and you were still a little bit human, a flicker of something more, something that still recoiled from the brutal efficiency of it all. They were perfect instruments of survival, honed by endless deprivation. You didn't feel full, not in the way you understood the word, but merely a fraction less hungry, the sharp edges of your starvation blunted, not removed. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Mongol Empire, where every calorie was a victory, that minor alleviation was, you realized with a jolt, a profound triumph in itself. It was a stark realization that true satisfaction in this life wasn't about abundance, but about the minimal comfort of not actively starving. You thought of the words, a mantra of self-preservation. I was once a person who had the right to refuse unclean food. Now, at any cost, I must swallow. The phrase was a bitter pill in itself, a testament to the erosion of your former self. It was a sense of profound self-betrayal, a realization that your own standards of dignity and comfort had been sacrificed on the altar of survival. You felt a wave of self-loathing, yet knew you were utterly compelled to accept this humiliating reality to simply exist. Your jaw, a grinding mill, was now like a gate of jagged steel, forced to chew, forced to endure, symbolizing the unyielding will needed to survive. An old man, his face a map of countless wrinkles, sat opposite you, having already finished his meal. He was meticulously tying a new knot on his horse's bridle, his focus intense, almost frightening, as if this mundane task were a sacred ritual, a moment of quiet reverence for his most vital companion. His eyes, deep-set and ancient, swept over you, not with judgment, but with a quiet, piercing scrutiny, a silent assessment that seemed to gauge your very worth. You realized, with a chilling clarity, that here there was no idle chatter, no pleasantries exchanged. Every action, every glance held a purpose, a hidden meaning. The concept of asking, "What is this?" when offered food was not merely rude, it was a direct affront, an act of suspicion that would mark you. If you dared to question your sustenance, you would never be offered food again, a silent, deadly banishment from the tribe's most basic provision. This was a chilling secret, passed down through generations, a silent code of conduct as fundamental as breathing, a law etched into the very fabric of their being. You found yourself attempting to mimic their efficiency, eating quickly and silently, your every movement a conscious imitation of their ingrained habits, a desperate dance of conformity. Yet the meat still resisted, a stubborn knot in your mouth, its texture challenging your very will to consume it. Finally, with a monumental effort, you managed to swallow, your throat scorched and raw, protesting the forced ingestion. The feeling that settled in your stomach wasn't of satiation or contentment, but rather a heavy, dull weight, a leaden mass pressing down on your insides, signaling not pleasure, but mere function. You were, against all odds, adapting. And that adaptation, this gradual metamorphosis into a creature of necessity, was far more terrifying than any of the discomforts you had faced. It meant shedding layers of yourself you didn't even realize you possessed, a slow, agonizing metamorphosis into something new, something forged in the crucible of relentless hunger. This was the shocking reality of sustenance, where every bite was a battle, and every swallowed morsel a victory in the grim war of survival, a constant reminder that your past self was a fading memory swallowed by the vast, unforgiving steppe.
The insidious itch began as a mere tickle on your scalp, then rapidly spread, crawling like an army of unseen insects beneath the scratchy layers of felt and leather. It was a sensation of deep, maddening discomfort, a constant primal reminder that your body was no longer entirely your own, a living testament to your surrender. You tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as just another irritation in a life brimming with them, but it grew, a relentless, unseen tormentor, until the urge to scratch was an overwhelming, all-consuming fire that threatened to drive you mad. Your fingernails, already long and grimy, scraped uselessly against the thick wool, providing no relief, only amplifying the maddening sensation. You felt a sudden sickening wave of despair, a realization that even your own skin had become a battleground, one you were slowly but surely losing. This wasn't merely discomfort. This was an invasion of your last private sanctuary, and it announced with a chilling, undeniable clarity the shocking reality of your new existence. The midday sun beat down, a relentless hammer on your head, driving sweat from your pores in torrents. Your clothes, already stiff with dried sweat and grime, clung to your skin like a second, suffocating hide. The question, "When do I get to bathe?" haunted your mind like a persistent ghost, a nagging whisper from a forgotten past, a phantom of a luxury that now seemed as distant as the stars. It was a question asked in a world that no longer existed, a world of running water, of soap, of the simple pleasure of cleanliness. Here, you understood very quickly, you don't bathe. The very concept of regular washing, of luxuriating in warm water, was a ludicrous fantasy, a dangerous indulgence in this unforgiving landscape. In the Mongol Empire, cleanliness had absolutely nothing to do with soap or a ceramic tub. It was about not succumbing to infection, about avoiding the swift, brutal embrace of dysentery or the festering rot of an untreated wound. Even that, you realized with a cold shiver, was a precarious, razor-thin compromise, a daily gamble against unseen microbial armies. Your very survival hinged on a fragile truce with pathogens, a desperate hope that your body's dwindling resources could ward off the inevitable. You could smell yourself now, not just faintly, but with a rich, pervasive pungency that had become your new, unwelcome perfume. It was the heavy, leathery scent of old hides, mingled inextricably with the raw, musky smell of horse, a primal aroma that clung to your skin and hair. Then there was the sharp, smoky tang of meat smoke, a permanent fixture in your clothing, as if every fiber had absorbed the very essence of nomadic cooking. And beneath it all, the subtle, sour note of your own felt boots, a fermenting, earthy aroma that seemed to emanate directly from your weary feet. Your personal scent, once a private affair, was now like an invisible armor, a protective layer that blended seamlessly into the similar olfactory tapestry of everyone around you. It was a collective scent of survival, raw and unapologetic. No one commented on it. No one wrinkled their nose in disgust. Indeed, the opposite was true. If you were to suddenly appear smelling of flowers or sweet perfumes, you would immediately be deemed an outsider, an anomaly. You would either be a spy, a cursed individual touched by malevolent spirits, or perhaps a terrifying combination of both. Cleanliness, as you knew it, was a mark of weakness, a vulnerability that had no place in this brutal landscape. You closed your eyes, willing yourself to listen past the frantic beat of your heart, past the ceaseless hum of insects in your hair, trying to find your own pulse amidst the 100 tiny itches. A distant, melancholy song carried on the wind from a nearby gur reached your ears, a young woman's voice, soft as a dove's coo, singing a lullaby that spoke of home and longing. For a fleeting moment, the raw, unyielding reality around you faded, replaced by a ghostly echo of tenderness. The contrast was jarring, a splash of color in a world painted in shades of grim gray, making the dirt and the smells even more strikingly vivid. Your thirst, a constant rasping presence in your throat, fueled a desperate craving to scrub yourself raw in the nearby river, to feel the cool, rushing water cleanse away the layers of accumulated grime and despair. But a secret buried deep beneath the sands of time, a wisdom whispered down through generations, taught a different truth: that water was for drinking, precious beyond measure, more valuable than life itself. It was the lifeline of the tribe, a sacred commodity not to be squandered on frivolous acts of hygiene. You want to scrub yourself clean in the river? Be my guest. You had overheard a grizzled old warrior with a face like weathered stone tell a new recruit, his voice raspy as sandpaper. You want to die a slow, agonizing death with dysentery, with soft skin? Be my guest. His eyes, cold as glacial ice, pierced you through, a silent warning etched deep into your memory, a chilling premonition of your likely fate should you dare to indulge in such a folly. The words, a cold, stark warning, resonated with the brutal pragmatism of this world. You learned to dismiss the very thought of bathing, a foolish yearning that served no purpose but to torment you. Instead, you simply wiped your face with your sleeve, a futile gesture that merely smeared the dirt, and continued on. Soap did not exist here, not in any form you recognized. There was only animal fat, ash, and the abrasive grit of sand. If you desired to exfoliate your skin, to slough off the dead layers that accumulated with alarming speed, you could always rub a handful of dirt on your face and pretend it was a luxurious spa treatment, a bitter, self-mocking joke to ease the grim reality.
Your hands, when you looked at them, were caked with grime, the dirt ingrained so deeply beneath your fingernails that they appeared permanently stained. Your nails themselves were long and sharp, like natural weapons, honed by the rough demands of daily life, capable of tearing and scraping with surprising efficiency. Your hair, a tangled, matted mess that hadn't seen water in months, was still meticulously tied back and tucked under your felt hat, not for cleanliness, but because appearance still mattered, though in a very different way. It wasn't about being clean. It was about presenting the unmistakable visage of hardened resilience, of seasoned experience. This was the only form of respect you could earn, a silent declaration that you had endured, that you were tough enough to survive. And then there were the lice. You didn't eliminate them. You learned to manage them, a grim, unspoken pact with your microscopic companions. They were simply a part of this existence, an unavoidable truth. People say that rumors whisper, carried on the dry winds of the steppe, that some Mongol warriors, especially the older ones, would even give names to their most stubborn lice, a strange, morbid companionship born of proximity. Sometimes, in the long, silent evenings around the dying embers of a fire, they would even pick them off and toss them into the flames, watching them sizzle and pop, a macabre form of entertainment, a small, fleeting act of rebellion against the constant irritation. You recognized with a sickening lurch in your stomach that this too was simply a part of life now. If the lice grew too numerous, if their bites became too maddening, you simply smeared animal fat over your body, a primitive repellent, and mentally challenged them to continue their assault, a silent, desperate defiance. You had learned to accept it all, to integrate these previously unthinkable realities into your daily existence. And that acceptance, that gradual, horrifying surrender to the absolute squalor of survival, was far more chilling than any foul smell you encountered. It wasn't just your body adapting, it was your mind, your very soul, bending and conforming to the brutal, unvarnished truth of the steppe, a chilling transformation that stripped away everything you once held dear about yourself. You observed the Mongol warriors around you,
their eyes unblinking, their movements deliberate, their faces impassive. They were like machines, efficient, unburdened by frivolous concerns of hygiene or comfort. And you? Am I still human, you wondered? The question a sharp, cold blade twisting in your gut. Do I even remember the scent of soap, the feel of clean skin? Or have I forgotten who I was before this life swallowed me whole? The contrast was stark, a mirror held up to your own erosion. Their quiet acceptance was a powerful rebuke to your lingering anxieties, a testament to a different kind of strength, one forged in the crucible of constant deprivation. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the vast sky in hues of orange and purple, the air grew even colder, a bitter promise of the night to come. You pulled your layers tighter, the familiar smell of your own accumulated grime now almost comforting in its familiarity. It was the scent of survival, a badge of endurance you wore whether you liked it or not. This journey had stripped you bare, leaving you with nothing but the most primal instincts and a body that had learned to exist in conditions that would once have seemed impossible. And you knew, with a chilling certainty, that the most brutal tests were still to come. The unseen battles with your own decaying self were as constant as the physical ones. You were no longer just traversing a land, you were becoming a part of its harsh, undeniable essence. Every night as you lay down, the ground hard beneath you and the sky an indifferent blanket of stars above, you felt the slow, creeping transformation. The gnawing hunger, the relentless cold, the pervasive filth, they were no longer just external forces. They had become a part of you, etched into your bones, woven into your very being. Your senses, once refined, were now brutalized, desensitized, attuned only to the raw necessities of existence. You were learning the language of the steppe, not through words, but through the harsh whispers of survival. The idea of a mirror, of seeing your old reflection, was both terrifying and strangely alluring. Would you even recognize the person staring back? Or would you see only the unflinching, hardened gaze of a survivor, a reflection of the very landscape that had consumed you? And you knew the most brutal truth was still waiting ahead.
The sudden, piercing whinny of a startled horse ripped through the crisp morning air, a jagged shard of sound that tore through the fragile peace of the sprawling camp. Your head snapped up, your breath catching in your throat, a silent gasp of pure, instinctive alarm. On the horizon, a small, innocuous cloud of dust, barely a smudge against the vast, indifferent sky, began to swell and churn with alarming speed, quickly transforming into hundreds of horsemen charging forward like a gathering storm, their silent approach a terrifying omen. Your stomach twisted into a knot of cold dread, a coiled serpent deep within your gut. Yet strangely, there were no shouts of panic, no chaotic cries of fear. Around you, the faces of your comrades, usually etched with a weary stoicism, became hardened masks of grim purpose, their eyes fixed with unwavering intensity on the approaching menace. There was no fear in those gazes, only a steely, unyielding resolve, a quiet readiness for death. The wind, which moments before had whispered softly, now shrieked past your ears as you spurred your horse into a gallop, the collective momentum of the horde a wave of unstoppable force. The thunderous beat of hooves against the sun-baked steppe echoed like 1,000 war drums, vibrating through your very bones, a primal rhythm of impending doom. Your hand instinctively reached for your Mongol bow, short, deceptively simple, and lethally curved. It felt heavier than its appearance suggested, forged not just from horn and sinew, but from the iron will and unyielding spirit of survivors. You felt the familiar weight of 70 arrows in your quiver, each one a silent, deadly promise of destruction, a small arsenal of fate at your fingertips. The cold metal of the arrow tips against your thumb was a chilling comfort, a tactile confirmation of the grim task ahead. You didn't wait for a command, a shouted order lost in the rising din of battle. Your instincts, honed by the brutal crucible of the steppe, took over. You drew the bowstring back, a taut extension of your own strained sinews, your muscles screaming in protest but obeying without question. You twisted in the saddle, your body a fluid, living turret on the back of your galloping horse. And the first arrow shrieked through the wind, a tiny winged predator seeking its prey. Then another, and another. The air itself became thick with the whistling chorus of arrows, a dark, mad-made rain that descended with the chilling, impersonal thud of death. This was no glorious duel, no theatrical swordplay for honor. This was pure, unadulterated slaughter, a relentless barrage designed for one purpose: annihilation. You fired until your fingers were blistered and raw, the skin tearing with each release of the string. But you continued to draw and loose, for if you paused, even for a moment, you knew you wouldn't have fingers left to complain. You fired until your arm ached and screamed in protest, feeling as though it might simply detach from your shoulder, but you kept shooting, for if you faltered, you wouldn't live to see the sun rise on another day, a grim certainty that fueled your desperate frenzy. The smell of gunpowder, acrid and metallic, began to mingle with the sickly sweet tang of fresh blood in the air, a nauseating perfume of violence that coated your tongue and assaulted your senses. You saw one of your own arrows find its mark, a fleeting, brutal connection. A strange, almost repulsive satisfaction bloomed within you, a cold, clinical sense of accomplishment. In that horrifying moment, you realized, with a chilling clarity, that you were becoming one of them, a cog in their relentless engine of war. And that realization, that slow, terrifying erosion of your former self, was more frightening than any death you might face. As the enemy lines began to waver, to break, a frenzied, brutal chase began. The Mongol warriors, like wolves descending on a broken flock, pursued the fleeing remnants with unrelenting ferocity. There were no prisoners taken. There was no mercy shown. The desperate, dying screams of the vanquished were quickly snuffed out by the wind, swallowed whole by the vastness of the steppe, leaving behind only the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Then a ghastly silence descended upon the battlefield, a thick, suffocating blanket that replaced the cacophony of war. The Mongols didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They moved slowly, methodically through the scattered bodies, like the silent specters of death itself. Their movements were precise, economical, collecting their spent arrows, checking their horses for injuries, and, with a swift, practiced motion, administering a quick, clean knife thrust to the throats of the dying, those still writhing in agony on the blood-soaked earth. It was a clinical, unsentimental act of finality, an end to suffering, or perhaps simply an efficient clearing of the field.
You saw a young warrior, his face still boyish and unlined, his eyes as cold and emotionless as a winter sky, calmly deliver the coup de grace to a writhing enemy. There was no hint of emotion in his movements, no flicker of triumph or regret. It was simply a task, a chillingly routine duty performed with detached precision. This was their way, a brutal lesson in the indifference of life and death. You felt no sense of victory, no elation, only an overwhelming weariness, a leaden weight in your limbs, and a strange hollow emptiness deep within your chest. You had become accustomed to fighting, to the adrenaline of the clash, but you were still unaccustomed to the profound, desolate vacuum that followed the taking of a life, a silent void that seemed to absorb all sound and feeling. You looked at the fallen, their eyes open and unseeing, and wondered about the lives they had lived, the families they had left behind. Were they so different from you, from your own memories of a softer existence? People say that only the ancient walls of conquered cities truly know the real human cost of these victories, a silent stone record of the untold suffering. They bear witness to the lives extinguished, the culture shattered, the very fabric of existence torn asunder. As the last rays of the sun began to paint the western sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, the air grew still, the wind a mere whisper now. The steppe, a vast, indifferent canvas, seemed to absorb the violence, leaving no trace but the faint smell of copper and the unsettling silence. The bodies lay scattered like discarded dolls, mute testimonials to the brevity of life in this brutal world. Your hands, still stinging from the friction of the bowstring, felt strangely heavy, stained not just with sweat and grime, but with the invisible residue of lives extinguished. You were learning, day by day, that survival in the Mongol Empire wasn't about glory or honor, but about ruthless efficiency and the ability to disconnect from the humanity of your actions. Every engagement, every battle, was another layer of your old self stripped away, leaving behind a harder, more cynical core. You knew that this was just the beginning of understanding the true, shocking reality of their war, and the most brutal truth was still waiting ahead.
The air itself seemed to crackle, a preternatural stillness descending upon the vast, sprawling camp, heavy with unspoken dread. Your own breath, you noticed, was coming in short, ragged gasps, each inhale a sharp, painful reminder of the tightening noose of tension. Your heart, a frantic plum, hammered against your ribs, threatening to burst free from its cage, a wild bird desperate for escape. It wasn't the distant thunder of approaching hooves, nor the sudden shriek of battle that had frozen this bustling world. This was something far more intimate, far more insidious, the chilling silence that precedes an irreversible judgment. Every head in the camp, from the wizened elders to the wide-eyed children, snapped in unison, drawn by an invisible primal force towards a single central point. This wasn't merely an event, it was a ritual, and you, an unwilling spectator, felt the cold tendrils of its power already winding around your throat. You weren't the one accused, not directly, yet you found yourself an unwilling witness, a silent, paralyzed observer to a scene unfolding with the terrifying speed of a landslide. A man named Jochi, a relatively new addition to the tribe, was being dragged forward. His face was as white as freshly fallen snow, a ghostly canvas of terror, and his eyes, wide and pleading like those of a cornered animal, darted frantically, begging for a mercy that would not come. He was accused of a grave transgression, stealing a horse from another member of the tribe, a sin against the very fabric of their nomadic existence, a betrayal that struck at the heart of communal survival. There was no elaborate public trial, no eloquent lawyers, no intricate, convoluted legal process. He was simply brought before a small group of elders and one truly colossal man named Borjigin, the enforcer, whose very name seemed to thrum with an unspoken threat, a low growl of impending doom. Borjigin, his face a mask of weathered granite, looked first at Jochi, then at the magnificent stolen horse, its flanks still heaving from the chase, a silent testament to its value. And finally his gaze settled, cold and unwavering, on Jochi's begging, desperate eyes. A cold shiver, like an icy snake, traced a path down your spine, an unwelcome guest settling deep in your marrow. You had heard whispers, tales of the Yasa, the great law of Genghis Khan. It was said to be as simple as a knife's edge and as brutally effective in its application, a single swift stroke that cut through all ambiguity. You remembered the stories murmured around campfires, of Genghis Khan himself, a figure of legend and terror, personally executing a disloyal soldier, his blade a flash of silver before the stunned eyes in his army, a chilling lesson in absolute loyalty. Or the tale of a horse thief from another tribe, whose own hand, severed with a single practiced swing, became the stark, visible proof of the Yasa's reach. Here, in this world, justice wasn't a blindfolded goddess holding scales. It was a sharpened blade, wielded with unwavering conviction, a cold, impersonal force that knew no mercy. There were no shades of gray, no nuances of interpretation, only the stark black and white truth of the transgression and its inevitable consequence. Your own heart hammered,
not from fear for yourself, but from the chilling realization of the sheer, uncompromising efficiency of this unyielding system, a primal, untamed beast that demanded absolute conformity. Borjigan, the enforcer, a mountain of a man forged from the harshness of the steppe, wasted no breath on pleasantries or lengthy pronouncements. He began to move, his heavy felt boots thudding softly against the packed earth, each step a deliberate, measured beat in the silence, a drum roll to Jochi's fate. His breathing was even, almost imperceptible, a testament to his unwavering control. His judgment was delivered with a single decisive gesture, a flick of his wrist that was more potent than any shouted decree. Jochi was to return the stolen horse, and, as a penalty, he was to pay double its value in equivalent property. Jochi's throat worked, a dry, desperate swallow, his eyes flickering with silent terror as he looked down at the dusty ground. His jaw trembled, words caught somewhere between a plea and a strangled sob. The answer was already clear on his ash-pale face. He had nothing to give, no wealth, no possessions to atone for his transgression. His tongue, paralyzed by fear, was useless. In that harrowing moment, the most horrifying truth slammed into you with the force of a battering ram. If you could not repay your debt, then your own flesh and blood became the collateral, your body the very currency of justice. A finger, a hand, or sometimes, if the crime was truly egregious or the debt too vast, your very head. People say that rumors whisper, carried on the dry, endless winds of the steppe, that Borjigan has never failed to collect on a debt in this manner, his ledger always balanced with blood. The very air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of that unspoken finality, a suffocating blanket of inevitability. The long shadow of Borjigan, a dark, menacing silhouette, stretched across the ground, tightening its grip on the already suffocating atmosphere. A small cloud of dust swirled up as the closest members of the tribe, sensing the moment of judgment, instinctively recoiled, creating a small, clear space around Jochi and his executioner. Borjigan, his face still impassive as a granite statue, then drew a knife from his belt. It was a gleaming, razor-sharp blade, catching the pale sunlight with a sinister sparkle, a cold promise of pain. The faint metallic scent of the blade, the sharp, coppery tang of fresh steel, seemed to reach your nostrils even from a distance. Jochi began to tremble violently, his thin frame shaking like a leaf in a storm, a low, guttural moan escaping his throat, a sound like wind trapped in a narrow rock crevice, a strangled cry of pure, unadulterated terror. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, broken whispers of a life about to be irrevocably altered. He knew. You knew. Everyone knew. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Your stomach lurched, threatening to betray the sparse meal you'd forced down earlier. You instinctively wanted to turn away, to shield your eyes from the inevitable. But you couldn't. Your gaze remained fixed, a horrified spectator trapped by the brutal magnetism of the scene. And even if you had turned away, you knew you couldn't escape the sound. That sharp, decisive, sickening sound of steel on flesh, the harsh, grating squeal of metal as the blade was used, would haunt you for a long, long time. An indelible stain on your memory, a brutal reminder of the raw justice of the steppe. You couldn't help but wonder, with a cold, desperate tremor, if it were you, caught in that inescapable snare, what would you do? Would you fight, beg, or simply accept the unflinching decree of the blade? Among the hushed crowd, a few old women, their faces withered by sun and hardship, merely shivered almost imperceptibly, their ancient eyes reflecting the scene with a distant, practiced sorrow. A young child, perhaps no older than 5, held tightly to his mother's tunic, his own eyes wide with a mixture of fear and bewildered curiosity, a tiny, uncomprehending witness to the grim lesson. The distant figures, those on the periphery of the camp, merely huddled closer, their faces turned away, respecting the solemnity of the moment with a practiced deference. Afterwards, a profound silence settled over the camp, even heavier than before. No one spoke. No one offered words of comfort or commiseration. There were no tears shed, no wails of grief. Jochi was still alive, his body now bearing the indelible mark of his transgression, a permanent scar etched into his very being, a living monument to his error. But he was only a shadow of his former self, a broken echo of the man he once was, forever defined by his failure and the price he paid.
The Mongols, you realized, believed that justice had to be swift, clear, and utterly undeniable. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for lingering doubt. A secret buried deep beneath the sands of time, whispered down through generations, recounted how Genghis Khan himself had once executed a disloyal soldier with his own hands right before the assembled army to impart a terrifyingly expensive lesson in loyalty, a brutal demonstration of his absolute power. Mercy, it was implicitly understood, was a luxury reserved only for the weak, a sentiment that had no place in the hardened hearts of these warriors, hearts forged in the fires of necessity. Their brand of justice was a brutal form of clarity, a terrifying simplicity that cut through all pretense, a surgical precision applied to human flaws. You looked at the faces of the Mongol warriors around you. They harbored no hatred for Jochi, no lingering anger. They simply accepted the outcome, their faces as unreadable as ancient stones. It was just the way things were, an inevitable consequence. You understood now, with a chilling certainty, that in this world, survival demanded a heart harder than steel, a spirit utterly devoid of softness or the intricate complexities of human emotion. There was no room for sentimentality, no space for the delicate nuances of compassion. This was the shocking reality of justice on the steppe, where every crime was a challenge to the collective and every punishment a stark public lesson in the unbending will of the horde. You were slowly, agonizingly becoming desensitized to it all. The lines between right and wrong, between acceptable and abhorrent, were blurring, replaced by the single, burning truth of survival. As the silence stretched, broken only by the mournful whistle of the wind, a young boy, perhaps the same one who had watched the execution, turned his head slowly. His eyes, deep-set and dark, fixed on Jochi's retreating form, then flickered to you. There was no fear in them now, but a profound, unsettling curiosity, a nascent understanding of the world's harsh lessons. And you knew, with a certainty that chilled you to the bone, that the most brutal truth was still waiting ahead. The air itself seemed to thicken, no longer merely cold, but suffocatingly heavy with an unspoken significance. Your own breath, you noticed, was coming in short, shallow gasps, each inhale a sharp, painful reminder of the tightening noose of tension. Your heart, a frantic drum, hammered against your ribs, threatening to burst free from its cage, a wild bird desperate for escape. You were crouched beside the dying embers of a fire, trying to coax some warmth back into your hands, now calloused and rough as ancient stone, when a guard approached. He was a towering figure, solid as an oak tree,
his face an impassive mask, devoid of any discernible emotion. His gaze, however, was a sharp, unwavering point of light that pierced through the swirling smoke and fixed on you. 3 words, delivered with a voice flat and devoid of inflection, yet ringing with the absolute authority of a death knell, dropped into the silent air. "The Khan calls." Those words, simple yet pregnant with unspoken meaning, were enough to send a tremor through the very ground beneath your feet. "I've never stood before him. My heart is trying to tear its way out of my chest. Is there even time for a desperate plea, a bribe disguised as a ceremonial drink?" The thoughts flashed like lightning through your mind, a frantic, desperate attempt to find purchase in the shifting sands of your terror. You had heard the whispers, borne on the wind like ill omens, about those summoned by the Khan, and not everyone returned intact. A secret buried deep beneath the sands of time told tales that sometimes the Khan's summons was merely a test of loyalty, and the price for even a flicker of hesitation, a hint of disloyalty, was your head, severed from your neck, a grim, swift payment. A chill, more profound than any Mongolian frost, spread through your entire body, an icy current that plunged deep into your very bones. You rose, your legs feeling as heavy as lead, each step an act of monumental will, a march into the unknown, carrying you towards a destiny you could not possibly foresee. The weight of your own existence, now so precariously balanced, pressed down on you with crushing force. The guard led you through the outer ring of the vast encampment, past the silent, watchful figures of warriors and their families. The air here, though still cold, carried the faint earthy scent of freshly tanned bison hide from nearby drying racks, mingled with the sweet, cloying aroma of fermented mare's milk and a distant hint of spiced tea. These were the everyday smells of the horde, now charged with a new, unsettling significance. Your heart continued its frantic rhythm, a persistent reminder of the monumental gravity of the moment. Your mind, usually a whirlwind of survival strategies, was now strangely blank, cleared by the sheer overwhelming presence of the Khan's summons. As you approached the Khan's gur, the guard stopped, turning to face you. With a silent gesture, he pointed to the ground. This was the ritual, a prostration, a demonstration of absolute submission. You bowed deeply, your spine curving, then dropped to one knee, your head lowered, your eyes fixed on the dirt beneath your boots. The coarse fabric of your tunic scraped against the ground, a rough testament to your humble position. You held the pose, waiting for the unspoken permission to arise, feeling the cold seeping through the thin leather of your knee pads. Finally, a barely perceptible nod from the guard. You rose, your movements stiff, and followed him to the entrance. The Khan's gur was not a lavish palace, nor even a grand tent adorned with silks and jewels. It was simply a larger version of the simple felt dwellings that housed the common warriors, a structure built for function, not ostentation. The heavy felt flap was pulled back, revealing an interior that was surprisingly still, a stark contrast to the relentless wind outside. Inside, the sparse interior contained only a simple leather mat on the ground and a low, plain table, symbols of an unyielding austerity. A single flickering oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the felt walls, creating an illusion of warm, quiet refuge. The air within was surprisingly still, heavy with the faint scent of dried meat and a hint of wood smoke, a stark contrapoint to the raw, untamed world beyond its walls. You could feel the soft, yielding give of the animal hide beneath your worn boots as you stepped inside, a faint warmth radiating from the ground, a subtle comfort against the penetrating cold you carried within. The Khan sat there, not on a throne, but cross-legged on the leather mat, his posture straight and unyielding, like the mountains you had traversed. There was no elaborate jewelry, no gleaming armor, no outward signs of pomp or ceremony. He was chewing a piece of dried meat, his movement slow, deliberate, his expression of almost bored indifference, the look of a butcher long accustomed to the chill embrace of death, a master of consequence. His power was not displayed through outward show, but through an inherent, terrifying presence that seemed to fill the entire space, a silent roar that permeated every fiber of your being. You caught a fleeting whiff of cured leather and sharp, unwashed wool emanating from his robes, the very scent of authority. His eyes, when they finally lifted to meet your gaze, were as sharp as a Mongolian arrow, piercing and unwavering, seemingly seeing straight through you to the very core of your soul, stripping away your defenses. You instinctively lowered your head, your gaze fixed on the simple patterns of the leather mat beneath your feet, observing the faint swirling dust motes dancing in the lamplight. You knew that from the whispers that clung to the evening air, that people said looking directly into the Khan's eyes for too long could be a death sentence, a dangerous defiance that few survived. It was not mere disrespect. It was an act of challenge, an attempt to usurp a power that brooked no rivals.
He spoke, his voice low and raspy, like stone grinding against stone, yet each word reverberated in your mind like thunder, a seismic tremor that shook your very being. "You will go on an embassy." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken consequence. He paused, his jaw working slowly as he swallowed a piece of dried fruit, perhaps a sun-dried apple, its sweet, tangy aroma momentarily cutting through the heavier scents in the gur. Then his voice dropped, a finality in its tone that brooked no argument. "You will tell them this: submit or die." That was all. No debate, no negotiation, no room for argument or appeal. His command was absolute destiny, a decree sealed by the chilling silence of the felt tent, an unalterable verdict. You realized with a cold clarity that made your blood run even colder, that in this empire, power wasn't a luxury, it was absolute. It was the very air they breathed, the unbreakable chain that bound every soul to his will. There was no middle ground, no compromise, only submission or annihilation. The weight of his words settled on your shoulders like a physical burden, a mantle of impossible responsibility. As he spoke, you saw a subtle movement from the guard at the entrance, a slight, almost imperceptible nod from the Khan, a silent signal of your dismissal. The heavy felt flap was then pulled back, revealing the stark, moonlit steppe outside. You heard the faint clink of a bridle being adjusted by a waiting horse. Your horse. It was time. As you turned to leave, your legs still heavy and unresponsive, you felt the Khan's gaze burning into your back, a searing brand that lingered even after you were certain he had already turned away, his attention already on the next task, the next piece of dried meat. It wasn't an angry gaze, nor even a judging one. It was the gaze of a man who saw everything, knew everything, who knew exactly who you were, where you came from, and precisely what you were capable of. It was the stare of a true predator, a silent assessment that peeled away all your defenses, leaving you vulnerable and exposed. In that chilling moment, you understood, with a certainty that sank like a stone in your gut, that your life, indeed the lives of countless others, hung by a thin, fragile thread, a single gossamer strand held firmly in the Khan's powerful hand. The true terror didn't come from shouted threats or open declarations of war.
It came from the unnerving silence of a man who could wipe entire cities off the map with nothing more than a single imperious raise of an eyebrow, a silent gesture of annihilation. You felt yourself shrink, diminish, becoming a tiny grain of sand on the vast, endless steppe, utterly insignificant in the face of such overwhelming, unquestionable power. This was not just a leader, this was a force of nature, a human embodiment of the relentless, unforgiving landscape. The cold reality of your mission settled over you like a heavy shroud. You were to be the messenger of death, the herald of submission, carrying words that would either save or doom entire populations. Your own opinions, your own fears meant nothing. You were merely an instrument, a blunt tool in the hand of the Khan, to be used and discarded as he saw fit. The honor, if it could even be called that, was a chilling burden, a heavy cloak woven from the threads of countless unspoken fates. As you emerged from the gur, the ordinary sounds of the camp, which had seemed so muted inside, now assaulted your ears with a strange intensity. The distant whinny of a horse, the clatter of a cooking pot, the low murmur of voices, they all seemed to carry a new, unsettling resonance, a fragile symphony played out under the shadow of absolute authority. The weight of the Khan's command pressed down on you, a physical presence that made each breath feel labored. You were now acutely aware of every single Mongol warrior, every member of the tribe around you. Their existence, their survival, their very purpose was intertwined with that man in the simple gur. Their loyalty, you knew, was not born of love or admiration, but a primal, bone-deep understanding of his absolute power and the swift, brutal consequences of defying it. The long journey ahead, across frozen plains and desolate mountains, seemed less daunting than the weight of the message you carried. You were not just delivering words, you were delivering fate, a judgment sealed by the Khan's unblinking gaze. The knowledge that entire cities would crumble, entire populations would be enslaved or slaughtered, all based on the words you uttered, was a crushing burden that settled deep in your soul. And in the chilling silence of the Mongolian night, under the vast, indifferent sky, you understood that your survival now hinged not just on your own strength and cunning, but on the delicate balance of the Khan's will, a perilous tightrope walk between life and oblivion. You were merely a chess piece on a vast, brutal board, and the next journey would be the most critical test yet of your newly forged resilience.
The air itself was a brutal, physical entity, a sharp, unseen blade that sliced through your layers of felt and leather, biting at exposed skin with a malicious glee. You awoke not merely to cold, but to a terrifying, absolute stillness, a world frozen solid around you, its breath held captive by the biting wind. Every millimeter of your skin felt numb, then sharply, intensely painful, as if being torn apart, the sensation spreading from your fingertips up into your very bone marrow. The familiar warmth of the communal fire, usually a beacon of comfort, seemed to shiver and shrink, battling a new, unseen enemy, a relentless, creeping frost. This wasn't just another frigid morning. This was the winter's first, deadly embrace, a silent, suffocating promise of the trials to come, a stark declaration of war by the land itself. Your fingers, stiff and unresponsive, felt like frozen stones, their sensation long gone, replaced by a dull, aching numbness. The biting chill crept into every fiber of your being, insinuating itself through the thickest hides, reaching deep into your marrow, freezing your very essence. The ground, when you finally pushed yourself up, was coated in a shimmering, treacherous sheet of silver ice,
a deadly camouflage for the frozen earth beneath. It was beautiful, yes, but with the chilling allure of a serpent's scales, a beauty that promised only oblivion. Even the horses, usually so robust and stoic, stood with hunched shoulders, their heads tucked low, their eyes reflecting a primal, instinctive fear that mirrored your own. Their breath plumed in the air, a visible struggle against the biting chill. You knelt, your knees protesting against the frozen ground, and began the laborious task of attempting to light a fire. You gathered the precious, fragile pieces of dried horse dung, black and brittle as ancient coal, and a handful of dry grass, carefully mixed with rendered animal fat, a trick a seasoned Mongol warrior had shown you, ensuring a quicker, hotter flame. But your fingers, trembling uncontrollably, seemed to rebel against your will, making the simple act a titanic struggle. Each time the wind shrieked past your ears, it was the howling of a malevolent demon, a sharp, icy claw that seemed to tear at your skin, scraping away your very resolve. The warmth of the brief flames when they finally caught felt like a fleeting dream, constantly threatened by the relentless onslaught of the wind. Night descended, not gradually, but with the abruptness of a falling axe, plunging the world into a new, deeper realm of cold. You huddled closer to your horse, its warmth your only lifeline, a living furnace in the vast, unforgiving expanse. You had learned to find the shallow depressions in the ground, places where the wind carved out natural shelters, and you scraped away the top layer of light, powdery snow to create a more effective windbreak. Your water skin, carefully wrapped in grease-soaked animal hide, felt slightly less rigid than before, a small victory against the frost. Outside the meager shelter, snow began to fall, thick and relentless, a white curtain that seemed to erase the very horizon, blotting out every familiar landmark, turning the world into a featureless, terrifying expanse of white. The flakes, tiny, icy invaders, drifted down in a silent, steady stream, accumulating with unnerving speed. Then, from the impenetrable white veil of the blizzard, you heard it, a chilling, rhythmic clacking in the distance, a sound like bone on bone, a premonition of death. It was the unmistakable sound of starving wolves, their jaws chattering from the cold, their hunger a palpable force that seemed to carry on the wind. They too faced the brutal embrace of winter, and they would not miss an opportunity. A silent, patient enemy waiting in the shadows. You knew from the whispers that clung to the evening air, from the tales told around dying fires, that in the harshest winters these ghosts of the steppe sometimes followed the horde for weeks, a relentless shadow, waiting for the slightest mistake, the smallest sign of weakness, a single stumble that would deliver a meal. My God, do I even remember the scent of fresh rain on warm earth, or the sound of a spring stream unfrozen? A sudden, piercing memory sliced through the chilling reality. Your mother's hair, a cascade of silk, billowing like a golden flag in the warm spring breeze. Her laughter, a bell-like melody, as she chased you through a sun-dappled field of wildflowers. The image, fleeting and vibrant, made the current cold feel even more bone-deep, the contrast a cruel, vivid torment. You tried to snatch moments of sleep, to lose yourself in the temporary oblivion of unconsciousness, but every creak of the jour, every shift of the wind, every distant phantom sound of the wolves transformed into a potential threat, a whispered promise of danger. You felt your body slowly, agonizingly turning to ice, a living statue in the grip of the merciless cold. A part of your will to live, a fragile flame, was slowly but undeniably eroding, flickering under the onslaught of the elements. You did not complain, for complaining was a futile cry in a world that would never hear you, a pointless expenditure of precious energy in the face of an indifferent universe. The only sound was the screaming silence of the snow and the pounding of your own terrified heart. One morning, you awoke to an even deeper stillness, a more profound quiet that sent a fresh wave of dread through you. Beside you lay Urdain, a Mongol warrior, his face usually hard and impassive, now pale as death, his eyes staring blankly up at the relentless snowy sky, frozen in a final, unseeing gaze. You remembered his quiet smile just yesterday, a rare, fleeting expression that had touched your shared misery. He had simply looked at you, a knowing glint in his eye, and whispered, "The ancestors call. Soon, perhaps." Was it a farewell, you wondered? He had died in his sleep, a silent, unceremonious departure, a grim testament to the winter's insidious power. There were no rituals, no laments. A few warriors paused, their eyes sunken and hollow, reflecting a vast, empty acceptance, a deep, quiet understanding of the inevitable. They stripped him of his armor, his weapons, and anything else that could be used, his heavy felt coat, his worn leather boots, even the few dried rations he carried. Then, without a word, without a backward glance, they continued on their journey, leaving Urdain's body to the mercy of the steppe's scavengers, a final offering to the unforgiving wilderness. For here, in this brutal world, death was often a blessed release, and a body, even that of a comrade, was merely a resource, a temporary vessel returning to the earth. You watched the retreating backs of the warriors, their figures shrinking rapidly into the swirling white. There were no tears shed, no outward expressions of grief, no wails of sorrow. You realized with a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in your bones that in the Mongol Empire you didn't just fight against human enemies, you fought against the very planet itself. And in winter, this inhuman, indifferent planet claimed victory far more often than you could ever imagine. Every single day was a battle for breath, for warmth, for the sheer audacity of existence. The sun, when it briefly pierced the perpetual gray, offered little solace, a pale, watery eye in a sky that seemed to watch your struggle with detached amusement. You learned to chew on small pieces of hardened snow, letting them melt slowly to avoid shocking your throat, a desperate trick to stay hydrated without succumbing to the cold. As the days bled into weeks, each one a monotonous cycle of numbing cold and desperate survival, the tribe continued its relentless march. Sometimes in the deepest part of the night, you would hear a low, haunting melody carried on the wind from a distant jur, a mournful Mongolian lullaby that spoke of lost loved ones and the vastness of the steppe, a fragile thread of humanity woven into the fabric of the brutal cold. You also noticed the small, often faded charms tied to the felt walls of the jur, simple invocations to the sky gods and nature spirits, silent prayers against the harshness of the season. These small gestures, these whispers of hope in the face of overwhelming odds, became touchstones in your own struggle. And you knew, with a chilling clarity, that the vast white expanse stretched before you was not just a path, but a gauntlet of ice and death. And the next steps of this journey would test not just your body, but the very fragile core of your humanity.
The cannons had fallen silent, and the city, freshly conquered, died. Smoke, a ghostly shroud, continued to coil upwards from the smoldering ruins, the silent lament of a vast open grave. The only sounds disturbing its morbid peace were the faint, insidious crackle of distant fires, hungry tongues of flame still licking at the bones of half-burnt homes,
and the low, sickening thud and tear of something being expertly dismembered nearby. A hurried, unceremonial dinner for a warrior who had earned his meal with blood. Your own breath, which had come in ragged gasps just hours before, now felt shallow and meaningless, lost in the heavy air. This wasn't the joyous cacophony of triumph you might have expected. There were no victory horns, no triumphant shouts, no jubilant parades. The air was thick with the scent of ash and lingering fear, a chilling perfume that spoke of lives extinguished and futures shattered. You sat, absently wiping the dried, rusty smear of blood from your knife blade, feeling a strange, hollow emptiness bloom within you. No joy in this victory, only a profound weariness, a vast, unsettling apathy towards life and death, two sides of the same tarnished coin. Could I still truly feel the warmth of human connection or the simple comfort of shared laughter? Would my senses ever truly recover from this constant assault of blood and dust? Your gaze drifted outwards beyond the flickering light of your own small fire to where columns of smoke coiled upwards like mournful ghosts from the skeletal remains of still smoldering houses, silent witnesses to the recent savagery. Yet, amidst the desolation, a tiny flicker of resilience caught your eye. From a charred wall, a stubborn green shoot was already pushing through the blackened timbers, a defiant promise that life, however brutalized, would find a way. The morning after the conquest dawned with a pale, indifferent light, illuminating the devastation with an unflinching clarity. From behind shattered doorways and through gaping broken windows, the local inhabitants began to emerge, their faces haggard and streaked with soot and tears, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate anticipation for the customary looting and wanton destruction that followed such a brutal takeover. They expected the inevitable, the frenzied stripping of their world, a final humiliating plunder. But the truly shocking reality was this: it did not happen that way. Instead, a group of Mongol warriors, their movements precise and economical, began to organize. One formidable warrior, his face a mask of weathered stone, unfurled a piece of cured animal hide. On it, etched with charcoal, was a stark, unambiguous list of professions: artisans, architects, scholars. He held it aloft, then indicated with a sweeping gesture that those with these skills should step forward. The local population, initially hesitant, began to shuffle forward, a palpable ripple of both confusion and hope spreading through the crowd. You saw their eyes, still haunted by recent horrors, yet now flickering with a new, fragile spark of understanding. You realized with a sickening lurch in your gut that thousands of fates were being bartered for mere survival, a brutal transaction orchestrated by a conqueror more interested in utility than vengeance. A grizzled Mongol elder, his braids thin and gray, approached the gathered groups. His movements were slow, deliberate, a serene counterpoint to the chaos that had just passed. He carried a small, ornate wooden cup. With a measured grace, he began to pour kumis, fermented mare's milk, into smaller, plain leather bowls, offering them to the key local figures. It was a traditional Mongol ceremony, a sign of respect and bond, yet here it was infused with an unmistakable undertone of absolute power. The elder then took a pinch of what appeared to be fragrant powdered herbs and smeared it over the foreheads of those stepping forward, a chillingly pragmatic blessing for their new enforced servitude. He then offered a small wooden bowl of lightly spiced broth, its faint aroma of roasted corn and cinnamon, a jarringly comforting scent in the devastation. "Sein bei nu," he greeted a trembling old woman, his voice surprisingly gentle, before pointing her towards a group of weavers. You saw these same Mongol soldiers, the very architects of recent death and chaos, now moving through the ruined streets with a cold, detached efficiency, meticulously cataloging goods, ensuring that trade routes, the lifeblood of their growing empire, would soon be reopened. You could hear the crisp, rhythmic thwack of hammers on wood as temporary market stalls began to be erected, the jingling sound of newly opened honey pots as vendors timidly set up shop, the chillingly normal sounds of commerce returning amidst the ruins. They cared nothing for your culture, your traditions, your gods, or your intricate histories. Their only concern was the unimpeded flow of tribute, taxes, and vital information, the fuel that fed the insatiable maw of the empire. You realized with a sickening clarity that this was not senseless destruction. This was a ruthlessly efficient machine, a well-oiled engine of conquest, transforming everything it touched into a tool, a resource, or a weapon to serve the inexorable expansion of the empire. People say that a secret buried deep beneath the sands of time, whispered only in hushed tones by those who truly understood, was the startling simplicity of how the Mongols managed the vast, once great empires that had dared to stand against them. They simply absorbed their utility, discarding the rest.
Among the throngs of people being sorted, you saw an old potter, his hands, usually nimble, now trembling with fear. His face a roadmap of ancient sorrows. As he was directed toward the artisans, he stumbled slightly. Instinctively, without thinking, you reached out and steadied him, your hand briefly touching his rough, clay-stained arm. He looked up at you, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and surprise. His lips moved, forming a barely audible whisper. "Thank you, warrior. May your hands always find clay." It was a simple, heartfelt blessing, a fragile bridge of shared humanity across the chasm of conquest. You quickly withdrew your hand, pulling the rough wool of your sleeve over it, feeling a strange, unfamiliar pang of something akin to guilt, a fleeting echo of the man you once were. A few days later, the peace of this new order was shattered. A messenger arrived from a neighboring city, his silks still bright amidst the rubble, his demeanor radiating an air of hollow confidence, an echo of a world that no longer understood. He was ushered into the care of a Mongol general, a man whose reputation for unwavering brutality preceded him like a dark, chilling wind. A palpable tension settled over the camp, the usual hum of activity muted by the anticipation. The scent of warm, spiced meat broth wafted from nearby cooking pots, a bizarre contrast to the tension. Then, from within the general's gare, a sudden, guttural scream, abruptly cut short, tore through the thin felt walls, a single, horrifying syllable of agony that sent a cold spike of dread through every heart. The silence that followed was absolute, crushing, more terrifying than any battle cry. When the gare flap finally parted, it was not the general who emerged, but another warrior. In his hand he held a small, bloodied stake. On it, impaled with grotesque finality, was the severed head of the messenger. His face frozen in a rictus of terror, his eyes still wide, staring into an eternity of silence. It was then placed with deliberate precision on a small post directly in front of the general's gare, a stark, undeniable monument to a failed negotiation. There was no explanation offered, no words exchanged. This was simply how the Mongols greeted offers of peace that did not come with absolute unconditional surrender. Peace here was merely the absence of resistance, a temporary quiet bought with subjugation, not the true cessation of violence, a cold, transactional state. Your blood turned to ice in your veins, a frozen river incapable of movement. A sharp, searing pain twisted in your gut, not of empathy, but of sheer, absolute terror.
It was a pain that drew a single, involuntary tear to your eye, a tear not of sorrow for the fallen, but a bitter, metallic taste of fear, so profound it threatened to consume you whole. You understood with a chilling, undeniable clarity that every word spoken, every action taken in this world came with a price, and the price for defiance, for anything less than complete submission, was always unpayable. A debt beyond the capacity of any life to settle. This was the shocking reality of how they established order. A brutal, efficient system built on the bedrock of fear and absolute power. It was a lesson etched not in words, but in blood and bone, a terrifying testament to their unwavering will. You lowered your head, feeling the rough, dried blood on your knife blade beneath your thumb, your gut twisting with a strange mix of revulsion and grudging comprehension. The city, though scarred and traumatized, would revive, not under its own banners, but under the unblinking, unyielding gaze of its conquerors. It would rise again, but it would always bear the indelible mark of this conquest. A new skin stretched taut over old bones. The silence that now permeated its streets was not the peace of contentment, but the heavy, suffocating quiet of absolute obedience. A new kind of order forged in the crucible of their brutal efficiency. And the next journey, you knew, would lead you deeper into the heart of this unsettling transformation, this chilling new world.
The cannons had long fallen silent, but the ghosts of their roar still echoed in the vast emptiness, a chilling reverberation that settled deep in your bones. You rode west, further than any map you knew dared to venture, towards what felt like the very edge of the world, where the sky met the vast, featureless plains in an unending, blurring horizon. Here the wind, a tireless sculptor, had polished the ancient stones until they shone like dark, indifferent mirrors. And the sand dunes, vast, undulating waves of ochre, stretched to meet a sky that seemed to bleed into the horizon. This wasn't merely thinner air. It was a palpable void, a realm of whispers where the line between reality and legend blurred, where the very fabric of existence felt stretched taut and fragile. People said that in these desolate reaches, ghost armies could vanish as quickly as they appeared, swallowed by the dust and the wind, and entire cities were swallowed by the sand overnight, leaving no trace. There was even a chilling tale of a legendary mountain where Genghis Khan's own brother was said to have disappeared for 2 long years, only to return with an unblinking smile, a mask of serene terror, more terrifying than any curse, a silent testament to an unknown ordeal that had twisted his very soul. You didn't believe all the superstitions, not entirely, but you found yourself riding slower, your movements more cautious, each hoofbeat a question mark against the vast emptiness. The air, though no longer biting, had a dry, dusty taste, a flavor of ancient secrets and forgotten empires. A single withered aspen leaf, a fragile golden shard, tumbled endlessly across the sand, a lonely traveler in a forgotten land, a poignant symbol of fleeting existence. Even your horse, a beast that had eaten human flesh and slumbered through blizzards, now trembled beneath you, whinnying at non-existent shadows, its usual stoicism replaced by a primal shaking unease that made your own skin crawl. Suddenly, the horse reared, a sharp, terrified cry tearing from its throat, its eyes rolling wildly, fixed on a point far in the distance where a faint shimmering distortion seemed to dance above the dunes, a mirage of impossible forms, a twisted reflection of something you couldn't quite grasp. Your Mongol guide, a man whose face was etched with the harsh lines of the steppe, his voice a low rasp, almost a whisper, muttered, "Noide konzang chokela." This place is not for strangers. It keeps what it takes. Before you could ask, he dismounted, pulling a small, gnarled stick from his saddlebag. With swift, practiced movements, he drove it into the sand, its tip carved with ancient Mongolian runes, a silent prayer against the unseen forces that held sway here. A faint plume of ash, carried on the wind from some unseen ritual offering, swirled around your boots, a ghostly embrace from the spirits of the boundary, a chilling welcome to a land where man was mere an intruder. I remember the first time I heard the war drums beat, a thrilling thunder in my chest, a call to glory, a promise of purpose. Now, those same drums feel like a funeral knell for the man that I once was, the human part of me that still clings to the edges of this brutal existence. At night, you made camp in a ghastly silence, broken only by the relentless, whistling keen of the wind, a banshee's wail that sliced through the night, carrying untold warnings, whispering secrets of what lies beyond. You built your fire higher, the flickering flames offering scant comfort against the unseen terrors that seemed to lurk just beyond the circle of light. This was a land not just wild, but ancient, a primordial canvas etched with forgotten legends, and you, a mere human, felt smaller than a grain of sand under its indifferent gaze, a speck of dust in the face of eternity. Every rustle of dry grass, every distant cry of a nocturnal predator became an amplified threat, a chilling echo in the vast, unforgiving expanse, a constant reminder of your vulnerability. Your guide, sitting cross-legged, hummed a low, mournful Mongolian folk song, a haunting melody about lost souls and the endless steppe, a shared lament for the transient nature of life in this harsh land. Then, one day, as if pulled by an invisible thread, you turned back. You began the long, arduous journey eastward, retracing your steps, leaving behind the realm of ghosts and thin air and the unnerving silence of the boundary. As you rode, slowly, irrevocably, back towards the established territories, you began to realize that the world you were returning to had fundamentally changed, not just in landscape, but in perception. The people of the West, the chroniclers of their own narratives, would soon write their books, their histories etched in ink and bias, a selective truth designed to serve their own purpose. They would brand you and all of your kind as barbarians, as hordes, as if you were nothing more than a fleeting blur of horse and arrow, a destructive force of nature, with no complexity, no inner world, a simple villain in their grand tale.
The very people who called themselves historians would etch only the ashes of a conquered city into their scrolls, never the laws that protected merchants, or the decrees that offered religious tolerance. They would conveniently forget the offers of peace, often extended before the first arrow flew, a pragmatic hand reaching out before the mailed fist descended. They would erase the protection afforded to merchants, the religious tolerance that allowed diverse faiths to flourish within the vast empire, provided only that you did not defy the Khan, a strange, almost progressive paradox within their brutal framework, a testament to their cunning as much as their cruelty. In their eyes, you were merely the shadow of violence, a faceless extension of conquest, not the man who had survived bitter, bone-crushing winters, not the man who had eaten unimaginable meals to cling to life, not the man who had witnessed justice, though brutal, undeniably clear and swift. They would flatten your experience, smooth out the rough edges of your truth until it fit neatly into their preconceived notions of savagery, a convenient simplification of a complex reality. Genghis Khan, the man himself, would become either the greatest conqueror or the most brutal tyrant, a figure of monolithic proportions, stripped of all human nuance. History, you realized, had a peculiar, almost melancholic habit of flattening the parts that made it uncomfortable, the complexities too contradictory, too nuanced to fit into a simple narrative of good versus evil. They would only remember the sieges, the cities burned to ash, the massacres that stained the earth, vivid brushstrokes of destruction. This was the most shocking reality. Not that you couldn't survive a single day in the Mongol Empire, for you clearly had, but that the modern world, with its neat categories and simple answers, simply couldn't contain the full, sprawling truth of it. A truth too vast and too unsettling to be confined to a single chapter. You had lived through it. You had seen it. You had felt it, the grinding reality of survival, the chilling efficiency of their justice, the unspoken power of the Khan's gaze. And you knew that no matter what history chose to write, no matter how it decided to contort the narrative, you had been a part of the truth, a naked, brutal, but undeniable truth. It was a truth not found in grand pronouncements or heroic sagas, but in the gnawing hunger in your gut, the aching cold in your bones, the haunting echo of screams and the eerie silence of conquered cities. It was in the unwavering loyalty demanded and the swift, uncompromising punishment meted out. It was in the unseen resilience of the people, both conqueror and conquered, who simply found a way to exist, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. This truth, for all its harshness, was real. It was unvarnished, unromanticized, and utterly compelling. It was the bitter taste of survival on your tongue, the scar on your soul from witnessing acts of both horrific violence and unexpected pragmatism. It was the weight of decisions made in the face of impossible odds. As you finally rode on to a more familiar path, a faint dust plume caught your eye, not from a Mongol horse, but from something heavier, more deliberate. It was the distinct track of a wheeled cart, unlike any you had seen in the steppe, disappearing westward. A curious, almost unsettling anomaly, a silent question mark etched into the ancient land, hinting at a presence or a journey that history might yet forget to record. Or perhaps it was a prelude, a low, unfamiliar murmur carried on the wind from the east, a distant hum of voices seemed to beckon, drawing you towards a new horizon, a fresh story waiting to be told, where the echoes of your own journey might finally find a listening ear. And so our journey through harsh lands and forgotten historical pages draws to a close. Thank you so much for accompanying our channel, for listening to every breath of this story. We hope the past moments have brought you unique emotions and profound reflections. If you found this video engaging and helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your valuable comments. We look forward to seeing you on our next adventures.